Hey guys, Sly here, and before we get into this video, I just want to let you guys know that this is actually a re-upload of a part of a series that I do on my Twitch channel called the Sly Army Tierlists, where we pretty much rank a bunch of just random topics that I'm personally interested in. And so, because of that, these opinions are not set in stone for how I feel about in the current day. And so if you guys want a more updated version of that, feel free to either check out the DeviantArt link down below or tune in on my Twitch that will also be in the description, or check out my Discord where I occasionally post some more updated versions of how I feel about certain topics. And so do keep that in mind. And also make sure to check out the description of the video itself for the timestamps for the particular topic that is presented here. But in any event, I hope you guys do at least enjoy. I recommend you guys listen to this as either like a podcast form or as just something to play in the background. But in any event, hope you guys at least enjoy. And let me just make sure this is actually working. We are live! Hey guys, Sly here, and welcome back to yet another tier list. And welcome back to another, what I'm just going to call from now on, a tier list, a mini list. So, you guys remember, I did a Green Day tier list earlier this year. And naturally, that made me think that, how about I do a few more of these throughout the future? Maybe not exactly, every single time, but generally speaking, if there's something that happens or if there's just a tier list that I feel like I'm able to fill in, might as well do that. So basically, originally we were going to be doing a different tier list tonight, but because of scheduling and just stuff that's been going on with my friend, because spoiler alert, I was originally going to do another type of list with my friend Austin, or Sly13, or as they recently renamed themselves, Sly Mori. But they made an announcement that there was something going on, and so because of that, I want to respect their time. But thankfully, I was able to come up with a backup idea because I can do that. But regardless, though, this is going to be the Fall Out Boy albums tier list this time around. Now, before we get into this, I hope you guys are, at least having a, good time with these types of streams. Again, I know what's going on with Twitch recently has been, pushing back a lot of people, understandably so. But I definitely want to see if I can continue this series, just even regardless of all the hardships of just personal stuff or even stuff involving the platform that we're doing. And so if you guys can, feel free to either hit that subscribe button or feel free to check out some of the other ways for that stuff. But the only reason why I'm shilling now is because I refuse to turn on ads because we've had issues with that. So, but yeah, normally I wouldn't do this, but I'm just hoping that, and also I'm just kind of hoping that everyone's just doing fine anyways, just even regardless of just me personally. Because at the end of the day, I like doing these. Yeah, I mean, the tier list craze has kind of died out, but I still like doing these anyways because it allows me to be able to at least form my opinion while being able to compare it to similar topics that I have with a certain item, whether it be an album, game, band, whatever, and explain my reasonings why. Because at the end of the day, I do feel like people just kind of tend to be oh, just push this out there, it's my thing is right and you are wrong, and it's can we just have time to explain this at least a little bit? And that's why I want to at least, achieve with this series, is basically just have that sort of down-to-earth, conversation about this. Because at the end of the day, I like being able to talk about the stuff that I like, and I like being able to talk about, my reasonings why, instead of just, being extremely blunt about it, like most of other certain popular websites on the internet. Sorry, I just had a cough right there. Okay, in all seriousness though, um, I like doing these, and yeah, I like doing these, and just at the end of the day, it's just fun for me to be able to discuss this sort of stuff just regardless. Now, that being said, today is the second anniversary for the series, so yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's pretty exciting. Again, we were originally going to do a different tier list, but that ended up having some issues. Don't worry though, next year I will make sure that this doesn't keep happening, because like I said last year, for the Halo tier list, that kind of, there were a lot of difficulties with that, but rest assured, next year I will make sure that it will be a bigger tier list. But just even besides that though, I decided that, like, instead, how about, similar to the Green Day tier list, we talk about a band that I personally have a lot of passion for, and is a band that I highly respect. And yes, that's what the scene hair is for, by the way, or the attempt at scene hair, because it just keeps falling for whatever reason. I've always had issues with this, even whenever I had this back in, like, high school. And you guys know what I'm talking about with some of my earlier live streams. Before I moved to Twitch. But whatever. Whatever. Whatever, it doesn't matter. It's just hair. But yeah, no. We talked about Green Day. Let's talk about Fall Out Boy. So, it should be no secret that Fall Out Boy is another one of my personal favorite bands of all time. I've put them in S tier in every single tier list that they have been featured in, and it's for good reason. It is because this is the band that got me into rock music just in general, or really just got me into music in general. Without Fall Out Boy, I wouldn't be listening to like 90% of the music I listen to. Or I might have been able to find a lot of the bands I listen to, but in a much different way. They hold a special place in my heart, and while I will admit that they have had a bunch of low points, just to put it lightly, they were a big force back in the 2000s with their sort of, big emphasis on punk mixed with, pop. Yeah, they were basically a punk band, but that made more, punk-ish pop music. I know a lot of people do lump them in with pop punk, and while I can agree with that to a certain extent, here's my hot take for this band. They've always, at least in their early days, they reminded me more of like even like older styles of punk rather than pop punk. At least for a lot of their music. Like, there's some music, like some of their albums I would definitely classify as pop punk, but they've always been they've been a lot heavier than a lot of the contemporaries that were around them at the time. Compare them to like Blink-182 or All Time Low, or hell, even Newfound Glory, one of the bands that heavily inspired them to begin with. They've always had roots, or they did have roots, we'll get to that, in more hardcore style of music. And, that makes sense considering that some of the members were actually a part of a few hardcore punk and even metalcore bands in the late 90s. And so that DNA carried over into a lot of the earlier projects that they did throughout the 2000s. And I'm mostly referring to a lot of their deep cut stuff, because once you start listening to the deep cuts, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But that also gets into my other point where it's like, yes, a lot of people did call them emo, and we even put them in the emo, tier list. But that's mostly just because, honestly, a lot of the music that they played was heavily inspired. Like, it was inspired from a bunch of emo bands such as Saves the Day and the Get Up Kids. which are other bands we've talked about. Go watch the emo tier list if you want more context for that. But in general, you get like they were basically sort of a continuation of a lot of the things that was going on in that scene of emo. And since they are from Chicago, they're from the Midwest, it makes sense that they took at least some of those elements of Midwest emo. Even if not all of their material counts. I mean, for fuck's sake, like, if you know this stupid website called Is This Band Emo, which, I mean, I'll just say this right now, don't use this as a source as, like, whether or not you determine a band is emo or not, like, because I know some people unironically use that, and, like, those people are kind of cringe. Why is the mouse not showing up for me? What the hell? Okay, there we go. Yeah, this website, it does say that they are not an emo band, but hold on, I don't know why this mouse is not showing up. What the fuck? Why isn't the mouse showing up? There we go. Sorry, this is just... They were clear, yeah. Even though it claims that they're not an emo band. Even this admits that during the 2000s they were emo pop punk, but by the 2010s they transitioned more into a pop sound. And so even though even the freaking website itself classified them as an emo band, or it said that it at least admits that they used to be, which at least exemplifies my point. But you just get my point, is that they were a big influence on not just one scene, but multiple scenes in the rock, sphere throughout much of that decade. And it obviously got to me and my cousins, because I've said this before, they were the first band I got into. I remember all the way back in 2005 when they released their music video for Sugar We're Going Down. That was their breakout single, and I remember it was my cousins who, they heard it from both their friends whenever they were still, going in middle and high school. Early middle school, maybe late elementary school. I don't want to get into it. But they heard it from them, and even from things like MySpace. Because, yes, MySpace was a thing, little kids. Okay, all jokes aside, though, obviously I got it from them, which, again, I do have to thank, that side of my family who've been able to show me this band, because without this, I wouldn't be listening to Green Day in the back. We literally did a full-on tier list off of Green Day, and they're my favorite band. And Fall Out Boy was my favorite band for a long time, although because of a few things that we'll be getting into, they have waned a little bit, but they're still in my top 3, specifically because of their early material. Because I will argue that in terms of the stuff that they made in that decade, there is no bad album. And I want to really exemplify this as well. If you do like some of the newer stuff, that is completely fine. As a matter of fact, I have actually grown on some of the stuff that they made in the past decade. So I'm not even saying that everything that they've made post-hiatus, because they went on hiatus from 2009 to 2012, I'm not even saying that, everything that they made post that hiatus is bad, because it's not. As a matter of fact, I can even argue that some of the stuff off of their new records are actually pretty damn good, even if it's not really rock. Now, that being said, I am just, delaying the inevitable. I think it's actually a good time for us to get into the list itself, because, again, I want to make sure that this is a mini list and not something that's over an hour. So pretty much how I'm going to be ranking this is that I'm only going to be ranking albums, and full on studio albums. And in the case of this first example, which, obviously we'll get to in a second, albums that were meant to be, their own thing. Because considering that me and Kai and, Psy, or Austin, whatever you want to call him, we made our first own album. It's not a studio album, but I still count those regardless because it's, completely fresh material. You just aren't associated with a record label for it. Which, yeah, that's a whole thing that I'm gonna have to talk about with, evening out with your girlfriend. But you get my general idea, is that I don't want this to be like a prolonged list that includes their 2004 EP or a bunch of the EPs that they made throughout like 2007 and 8 between Infinity on High and Folie à Deux. I don't want to include Pax AM because those weren't meant to be like full, like they weren't meant to be like commercial EP releases. Those those weren't supposed to be like commercial LP releases. Those were meant to be like sort of like a tied over thing. It's kind of the same reason why I didn't cover that stuff in the Green Day tier list. It's because that was meant to be like a tied over for their next big release. And that's also why we did not include their greatest hits albums or compilation albums from 2009 or 2019, because those are basically just repackaged songs from these albums, and so it would just be unfair because it's just the greatest hits of these albums, or basically just the singles. So yeah, we're just strictly ranking the 7 studio albums or just the 8 albums that they made throughout, the past like 20 years. Because yes, Fall Out Boy is almost going to be a 21-year-old band. They started in the year 2001, in like December of 2001, and have made 8 studio albums since, which, yeah, that might not be that long ago compared to 1990 with Green Day, but that still makes me feel old because I'm in my 20s now, and god damn it, that was such a long time ago. Ugh! So, yeah, and again, I'll be showing my bias with this list because, like I said, they're my 3rd favorite band of all time. Look, I've got this mix between Infinity on High and Take This to Your Grave shirt right here. I mean, just look at this. I got this while I was in Las Vegas back in 2017, and I still love this shirt. Look at this. This is an awesome shirt. I wish they made more shirts like this, or at least like released more shirts that were more in line with the stuff that they made back in the 2000s. But they're not going to do that because of certain things that are going on that Joe Troman actually is writing a book about, by the way, because I think it's already released. So I would check that out if you're interested in more in-depth stuff about this. But regardless, though, as you can see with this list, there's naturally not that much on here in terms of like the actual tierings. This is just like the one that we did with Green Day, where we've got bronze, which means it's just my least preferred albums or album. We'll get to that. Silver is like, if you're interested in this, I wouldn't make this your first choice, but check it out when you check out the other ones. Gold is like pretty good albums, still recommend them. And then Sugar, We're Going Down, or Diamond Tier, as I renamed it from Platinum, it's my favorite albums for sure. And so, yeah, either way, let's just jump right into this. So let's address Evening Out with Your Girlfriend, the album that is technically not an album, if that makes sense. So this was actually Fall Out Boy's, technically it's their first album, but the thing is that there was some weird, executive decision with their original record, and they didn't want this album released because they basically saw it as like a demo album as opposed to like, a full fledged studio release. But several months before they released Take This to Your Grave, that original record label released this, and that caused a bunch of drama. Go look it up. It's Now, that being said, this release is controversial in the Fall Out Boy community, and in that respect, it is considered by many people to be their worst album. However, I'm going to take a bit of a more optimistic approach from this, and this is going to piss some people off, but I'm going to put this in gold. I actually enjoyed this, because this was sort of like what I was talking about earlier with their emo/punk rock mix, because a lot of the deep cuts in this sound straight up just like the stuff that the Get Up Kids or Saves the Day were making, back in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And in terms of Fall Out Boy trying to do that, honestly, I think it worked a lot, especially with certain songs like Pretty in Punk, or hell, even this album's version of Calm Before the Storm. Yes, that song actually came from this album instead of Take This to Your Grave. It's kind of like Welcome to Paradise with Dookie and Kerplunk, where it's like, it's more known on the later album, but whatever. But, and granted, I will admit though, this is the weakest release out of the 2000s. Hell, I'm just gonna be honest. Like, I didn't even know this was a full-on, like, studio, like, I didn't know this was a full-on album. I just assumed this was another EP. But nope, it's labeled as an actual album. And for what it is, I don't think it's this disaster that they made, because, again, it's their first major release. And granted, they made a few EPs like in 2002 before this, but like in terms of like releasing an album, you could have released much worse. And again, I like to give the benefit of the doubt because this is their first record. Because usually I'm not a stickler like some people are about, debut records. And like I said, I can still have fun with some of the songs on here. Like, I occasionally actually play this version of Calm Before the Storm, more than I do the one that they did in Take This to Your Grave. And like I said, there's some other songs like Pretty in Punk in there. What else is on here? Granted, I admit that, like, I don't go back to this one as much. Yeah, this is the album that had Growing Up on it. So, yeah, their first, like, major song. And, yeah, Switchblades and Infidelity. Like, overall, not their best, but certainly not their worst. Trust me on that one. So, alright, next up we've got Take This to Your Grave. Their first official release under Fueled by Ramen, and their only release under Fueled by Ramen, which was a good choice, by the way. That was a good idea to move record labels, because, oh god. And honestly, with this record, honestly, I honestly would say it's as comparable, but just a little bit better than Evening Out. My thing about this album is that, like, in terms of, like, the first, album, it's actually pretty damn good. Granted, yes, it has that, again, it looks like the cover of Saves the Day's 1999 record, so, like, obviously you can tell the influence was there. But with this, though, it definitely has stronger songs overall. Like, Dead on Arrival and Saturday, and being like the big singles. I know there was Grand Theft Autumn, but I will just fully admit that song was ruined just because of like personal stuff. I don't want to get into it. But I mean, I'm over it, but I couldn't listen to that song for like a good 5 years. It's still a good song, but yeah, but yeah, though, like the singles were pretty good, and even like a lot of the deep cuts, like the Pros and Cons of Breathing and Grenade Jumper, the Patron Saints of Liars and Fakes. That's the last song on this album, and that song's underrated as hell. You guys should listen to that. It goes into what I was talking about with that post-hardcore influence, and honestly, it's pretty good. And like I said, Calm Before the Storm was re-recorded for this album, and it's a pretty good version of that song. Again, you can debate whether or not you like the rawness of the original or if you like this more refined version. It really just comes down to taste. But overall, in terms of Fall Out Boy albums, it's pretty good. Like, definitely, that's another thing. In terms of the stuff that they made in the 2000s, other than maybe some of the stuff on Evening Out with Your Girlfriend, at least when it comes to the stuff from, like, you know, Take This to Your Grip until Follow You Do It, there are no bad songs. I'm just going to be flat out honest. There is no skippable track for me, at least in my opinion. And even though I'm putting this in gold tier and not in, like, diamond tier, I still would recommend these, like, highly. So just keep that in mind. Which, speaking of, From Under the Cork Tree, this, honestly, well, I'm not gonna hide it. It goes in diamond tier. This is the album that had Sugar We're Going Down. Of course, I'm going to have a little bit of a bias with this one, but even then, this album fucking slaps. Like, oh my god. Again, this was the perfect, opportunity for them to lead the charge with a punk/emo infused album, and they nailed it with this one. All of the singles slap, because this also had Dance Dance and shit, why can't I think of it? Why? I'm literally a Fall Out Boy fan. Like, this was my favorite band. How do I not? A little less 16 Candles, a little more Touch Me. Like, those songs slap, man. Like, those are fucking awesome tracks, man. And, like, all of their deep cuts are so damn good, too. Like, Our Lawyer Made It. Oh, yeah. Keep in mind as well, this was around the time when they had the absurdly long song titles. So, let me just read them fastly. In terms of, like, songs, like deep cuts, like Our Lawyer Made Us Change the name of the song so we wouldn't be sued. I've Got a Dark Alley and a Bad Idea that says we shouldn't shut your mouth, the summer song. And I slept with someone in Fall Out Boy, and all I got was a stupid song written about me. Also, what I like to jokingly say, I have once slept with this one particular member from a band that called themselves Fall Out Boy, and all that I got from it, a stupid experience, was this really dumb, stupid song, only written all about me. I only do that as a joke. It's not the actual title. I just like saying it just as a troll. But there's so many damn good songs. Champagne for My Real Friends, Real Pain for My Sham Friends is actually one of my top 10 favorite Fall Out Boy songs. I love that song. It slaps. And even, Get Busy Living or Get Busy Dying, an emo/post-hardcore style of song that slaps. And hell, even the deluxe edition was pretty damn good with the, inclusion of Snitches and Dockers Get Stitches and Walkers and the music or the misery, which with that former song taking like even deeper into that influence with post-hardcore, and music or the misery, more pop punky influence. But you get my point, is that like this is a banger of an album. Go check it out. It's my first recommendation for anyone who wants to get into Fall Out Boy. There is no better album that they've made other than maybe one other album, but that's only because I'm a little bit biased for it because I love it. I love that other album, but in terms of actual songs I feel like everyone would enjoy, From Under the Cork Tree is the go-to album for that. It is a mid-2000s, just 2000s in general classic. So, go check it out. I love this record. So, it honestly, a part of me is actually conflicted on whether or not I say that this is my favorite album of all time, or if Dookie's my favorite album of all time. Like, it is a huge battle between the two. A part of me, though, says that this one is my favorite, though, because I've grown up with it a lot longer, and like I said, there's no skippable track. Seriously, you can listen to this entire thing without wanting to skip any of the tracks. it's that, like, everything, there's no filler. And that is a sign of an amazing album. So, that being said, I know I'm gushing about this, and I know that's not for everyone, because again, emo punk style of music isn't for everyone, but it's good with me. Now let's move on to Infinity on High. Now this one's going to be a little bit controversial, but I'm actually going to put this one. Ooh, okay. This one had Thanks for the Memories on it, as well as I'm Like a Lawyer with the Way You're Always Trying to Get Me Off, Take Over the Breakover, This Ain't a Scene, It's an Arms Race. Like, that's this album. And it also has, honestly, a bunch of other really awesome songs, such as Golden, like a amazing, sort of melodic ballad song. And Bang the Doldrums, more punk, like just flat out punk inspired track. And this was, I would say this is the last album that you could consider, or at least make the argument that it is an emo album, at least for me. And yes, I am wearing the shirt, but this is my favorite record, because granted, I am still going to put this in Golden. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put it above, but I'm going to put it below Take This to Your Grave. Why do I say that? Again, it's not that there's no bad song on this, record. But just looking back at it, I will admit there are some songs that I don't really go back to all that often, such as The Afterlife of the Party, or even the last song, I Got All This Ringing in My Ears and None on My Fingers. Again, they're not bad songs, far from it. But they are the weakest link. And which that really should just go to show just how good this band was back in the day, by the way, is that, like, if it's only like, one, maybe two songs that, are kind of skippable, that's actually pretty damn good. Like, that's a testament, but admittedly, they're just not my favorite songs. Oh, also, the music video for Carpal Tunnel of Love, which it's not even a music video. It's basically just a segment from Happy Tree Friends, which was pretty cringe. I hate that shit. You guys know how much I hate adult animation, and that is just no. But, like, the song itself is fine. It's another emo post-hardcore sounding, mixed song. And again, it's generally good one, though. I don't know. I just think it's the weakest out of the main four. If like the main big four of that decade, if that makes sense. So again, not a bad album, but it's my least favorite. So, and I think I should just exemplify that to people. So, but next up, we got Folie à Deux. And honestly, this is going in diamond tier. People fall asleep on this album. Oh my god, this is so damn good. Like, it honestly is a shame that people they don't love this album as much. Like, I love this album. Like, because this is, like, honestly the most experimental Fall Out Boy has ever been. And that's why I love it. And I think the experiment was so damn good. Because this is the album that they started to introduce more electronic sounding stuff. They had, like, more, pop elements in Infinity on High. But Folie à Deux, they not only did they experiment with more electro rock sounds, but this was also the album that, surprisingly enough, they took a lot of elements from grunge, at least for, some of their songs like 27 and America's Sweethearts. Because they're basically post-grunge songs. Which, if you go by that logic, as this being technically a post-grunge adjacent song, album, this is my favorite post-grunge album ever. And And I say that because it's like a lot of the songs on this album were clearly inspired by, like, you know, a lot of the more 90s adjacent bands, you know, like obviously stuff like Grenade, but even like stuff like Smashing Pumpkins, or even a little bit of like Nirvana or Stone Temple Pilots, at least in terms of like a few other songs. Well, a bunch of their other songs took a lot of elements from, like, you know, 80s, you know, synth style of pop music. But unlike other bands that tried doing that shit, Muse. God, I'm sorry. God, I am just coughing today. Goddamn. But yeah, unlike other bands, they weren't doing it to pander to nostalgia. So, like, it's a bit more accessible and respectable here. And again, just being their last album of the 2000s, as being a sort of a wrap up for what they were doing, because they would eventually, you know, go on a hiatus in 2009. This is a good way to at least end. Like, if Fall Out Boy ended with Folie à Deux and just didn't make any more music after that, I think this would have been a pretty damn good legacy here. Like, and again, they're more than just I don't care on this album. This one also has What a Catch, Donnie, which I know some people don't like the fact that they used other lyrics from other songs, but that kind of goes back to what I was saying. It was basically them sort of culminating the past like 5 years that they were this damn big. And so it was more of a love letter song to just the fans. And, you know, you don't really have a lot of songs, or not a lot of artists acknowledge, you know, and even thank the fans for being able to get them up to the level they were at, like that they got up at that time. And that's something I have to respect, because it at least the band acknowledges that, you know, it wasn't just, you know, them that got them up there. It was a whole community that they were able to gather. And again, some of the other songs, like I mentioned earlier, 27 is pretty damn good. $20 Nosebleed and West Coast Smoker, the last two songs on this album, they were pretty damn good. She's My Winona is a personal classic, like, favorite of mine. Ship Gold Standard, which again, more of a post-grunge kind of sound. Like, again, there's a lot of sounds that are in this album. Like, and again, they still doubled down on the pop, on the, like, the punk rock. This is their last, you know, album that I would consider to be like a, you know, a punk album for sure. And, like, again, it's just a fun time listening to it. I would recommend this album for sure, even if it's more experimental. Again, from under the Cork Tree is the safe option, but if you want something that's a little bit different from what they were doing in the compared to the rest of the decade, I would recommend Folie à Deux. That, and also this album inspired way too many, like, FNAF related memes. Like, I mean, literally, look at that. It's Pete Wentz in a yellow bear costume carrying a real, like, bear. Of course, back in, like, 2014 and 15, there were a ton of people making FNAF-related memes about that. Of course that was going to happen. So, it also proves my point that the communities aren't that different. So, but yeah, no, like I said, though, if Fall Out Boy was just these 5 albums and then the greatest hits album and all the EPs that they released throughout this decade, like throughout the 2000s, honestly, that would be a pretty damn good legacy. And I could easily see them being a band that not only would have been way more respected, but also just a band that honestly would be less controversial just in general. Because, like, this is honestly some of the best music that's been made of all time. Because, holy shit, like, there are very few bands that have the legacy of having no bad albums. Like, Rage Against the Machine, System of a Down, for a lot of people, Nirvana. Again, Nirvana's not my favorite band of all time, but I still at least respect them. And it seemed like Fall Out Boy was going to have that legacy. However, they would eventually go into hiatus for roughly 3 or so years. And then they came back in 2013 with Save Rock and Roll. So, I hate to be this one person, but I am not someone who is in, I don't love, I don't hate the stuff that they released post hiatus, but it's not my favorite thing. And admittedly, I don't really go back to this stuff. However, I can actually defend quite a few things that was on Save Rock and Roll. Like the title track, for example. The one that they actually got Elton John to be featured on this, which that was out of nowhere. They got Elton John of all people. And there's even a lot of songs that are on here that are actually, I actually will admit, are pretty damn good. Like Alone Together, I thought was pretty good. The Phoenix, it was a actually banger of an album opener. Where Did the Party Go? That was fine. Death Valley was pretty good. But this is a criticism that I know a lot of people have made, and I know I'm making the same criticism. But this felt less like a rock album and more of a pop adjacent album. And considering that the name of the album is called Save Rock and Roll, that does seem a bit disingenuous. Granted, there are rock songs on this. It's not just a complete pop album. As a matter of fact, I'd say it's probably just a flat out pop rock album with hard rock elements in it. Like for example, The Mighty Fall, that's a rock song. Death Valley, that's a rock song. Where Did the Party Go is a pop rock song. So it is still technically a rock album, but only by the narrowest of threads. So, and in terms of being, just kind of like a concept album, because this is technically it's a concept album. They released music videos for all of their songs, and it has a story. So it's kind of a rock opera, not rock opera, concept album. Excuse my language on that one. I did not mean to offend all of the other rock operas out there. I am sorry about that, but it is still a concept album. And it's okay. I'd say it's more good than it's bad, but compare it to every other Fall Out Boy record, I am going to put this in silver. Again, not bad at all. As a matter of fact, it is actually still, I would say this is still a good album, but it's not the first album that I would recommend. So, and admittedly, just looking back at it, I did listen to this album a lot when it first came out, but that was mostly just because it's this was the first album they released in 4.5 years, and I was super excited about the fact that a new Fall Out Boy record came out. But it doesn't hold a candle to the rest of the stuff. That, and also, of course, My Songs Know What You Did in the Dark, Light 'Em Up came out on this album. And honestly, just looking back at it, I would say that that's definitely their first single that was pretty weak. Because part of it is also just the fact that I'm sick and tired of hearing that song. But it's God, I want to like this song. A part of me does like this album. But just, and again, I'm not saying that it's even bad, but just compare it to the rest of the material, and it's just not there. And unfortunately, that is the trend that has cursed Fall Out Boy since they came back. And that continued with American Beauty, American Psycho, which is just flat out not even a rock album. Okay, well, okay, it is technically a rock album still, but even less so than Save Rock and Roll. There's only a handful of songs that I would consider to be rock. And hell, like Uma Thurman, which was like one of their big singles, literally just ripped off the Munsters theme. I don't know why they did, but okay. I know it was a sampling, but still. Though I will fully admit this though, I have actually grown a lot on this album. Like, like Jetpack Blues and Twin Skeletons. Honestly, those songs freaking slap. Even Novocaine and 4th of July is I'd say is solid enough. But yeah, no, that's the thing, is that this is less of a rock album and more of a pop album. And again, I'm not really the biggest pop person anyways. Like I'm not like a vile hater of the genre. I only hate it when it's the only thing that plays on the radio. That and the only thing that people play. That's when I have a problem. If it's the only thing that people play, because I'd rather have variety rather than just one sound. Which, at least with this album, each of the songs do sound different. And like I said, there's actually some pretty damn good songs on here, but I wouldn't say this is a full album. So I'm also going to put this in silver. Granted, if you ask me what day of the week, I might flip-flop and say that, Save Rock and Roll is the better album. Sometimes I might say that American Beauty and American Psycho is the better album. But generally speaking, I do not hate either of these albums. I just think that, and like I said, they're not bad. They're just not rock. Or at least they're not, deep in that sound that is associated with rock music. Which, that's not even in itself as a bad thing, but it just felt like they were chasing trends. Which, speaking of chasing trends, we've got to talk about Mania. So, it's been about almost 5 years since this album came out. Which, where the fuck did all that time go? Holy shit. God, that was so long ago. Yet it didn't really feel like it. And I will say this. It is Fall Out. It just. It is a bad album. It is, in my opinion, Fall Out Boy's first truly bad album. However, it does have its gems. Like, I think Last of the Real Ones is honestly, it's a pretty good song. Like, there's a reason why it's the most popular song off the album. I mean, I'm literally looking at the Spotify numbers right now. It's the only song of the album that has like over 100 million plays. And there's a reason why. It's because it basically felt like an extension of American Beauty, American Psycho sound, which, like I said, there were some good concepts in there. But here's the problem about this album. This is an actual album that is not a rock album. None of the songs resemble rock at all. And not only that, but also this is around the time when people started to see that Fall Out Boy was definitely following trends at this point, which, as someone who just explained that, they established the trends, they were not following the trends. And not only did they establish trends, but also made the trends damn good, like really, really damn good. This just really hurt to see, or listen to, I should say. And I did give this album a bit of a chance. I did give this album a chance actually like a month ago. And I will admit I still didn't really like it that much. However, because of Last of the Real Ones, and I will just fully admit this as well. Don't at me on this one, but I actually thought that Champions was okay. don't at me on that one. Like, at least there's at least they have something from this album that I actually, occasionally am willing to go back to. Because unlike Green Day during the Uno Do Tre days and with their most recent album, at least with this album, I can at least say that there's something I go back to. But that's the unfortunate thing, is that, like, it's still a bad album. And so obviously I am putting this at bronze because it is their weakest album, and it's for good reason. And it sucks because it's like I'm being harsh on this album, or I'm trying not to be harsh because, like, again, Fall Out Boy is one of my favorite bands, but I just have to be flat out honest. This album is just bad. Like, it just has... It sounds like it was just being derivative of bands that I fucking hate. Because it sounded like they took more inspiration from Imagine Dragons than they did with the legacy bands that they took inspiration from 20 years ago. And as someone who actively says that Imagine Dragons sucks, that hurts, man. And I am going to be a little bit of a leaker here about Joe Troman's book. Even some of the band members agree with that. And that kind of sucks because it's like, I don't want this, change of sound to be the ultimate downfall of this band. Because again, I love this band. This is one of my, like, this is the band that got me into music. Without Sugar We're Going Down, who knows what type of music I'd be listening to? Hell, who knows if I would even be interested in music? And it just sucks because it's like, it just feels like there's a rift between Pete Wentz and Patrick Stump with Andy Hurley and Joe Troman, like the backup people. And I don't want that to be the case. And I saw these guys live too. They are talented people. Like, yeah, this is one of the few bands I saw live, which I forgot to mention at the beginning. I saw them live back in 2017 before they even released this, like, album. And they got to play some of the songs live with their actual instruments. And it was actually pretty damn good. Hell, even the live version of Young and Menace, the song that everyone memed about because of the like that shit, like they did not play that because they knew, even they felt like Patrick knew that everyone hated that. So, and again, like, I don't want to feel like I'm blaming Patrick or Pete specifically for this, because maybe it's just, maybe they just got the fame, like, over their heads or something, because, like, Save Rock and Roll and American Beauty, American Psycho produced, like, hits even bigger than, like, their, the days of the 2000s. And that might also be a reason why they haven't really released new music since Mania, or at least, like, a major EP, or, like, LP, excuse me. It's probably because they'd rather just take their time or something, or I don't know. You get my point, though, is that, like, it's just one of those things where it's like, I just have to be honest with myself just regardless, and just say that Mania is unfortunately a bad album. It's not a terrible album. I've heard much worse. But what it represents is why I have to put it as their weakest album to date. Because it completely betrays what they did, like what they established back in the 2000s. It's just flat out not a rock album at all. It's just an electronic pop, like, / pop album. And even if you wanted to make that, it just does not compare to some other, even just genuine pop and electronic artists. Again, I don't like a lot of pop or, like, electronic music, but even I have to admit there's way better shit out there than this. So, and again, they're probably never going to see this, but as someone who has seen them live, and, appreciate that, all the guys in the band are talented. I mean, there's a reason why they've only had like one person removed and got them replaced with Andy Hurley. Like, they're one of the few bands that have had like major lineup changes, which is a respectable feat. Very few bands are able to get like, original members just together with each other at all. But as a major fan, and if by some miracle, if like any one of those guys do see this video, I just hope that you guys are able to just be passionate for what you're able to make. And I hope that you're able to make it work without feeling like you have to follow trends, because no one has to follow trends in order to be successful. Like, again, Fall Out Boy established the trends. They weren't the trend makers themselves. They weren't the trend followers themselves. Like, they made pop punk, emo, and punk adjacent music as big as it was back in the 2000s. Along with other bands like My Chemical Romance and Green Day's Return, as well as Paramore and All Time Low. And so all these bands, except for Green Day, but MCR, Panic, Paramore, and even a bunch of other smaller groups that may not be recognized now, like Census Fail or The Used, Chiodos, Boys Like Girls, The Academy Is. They can thank Fall Out Boy for that, for leading the charge of 2000s pop punk and 2000s punk and emo music. So even if they don't consider themselves emo, which I know that's a dirty word for some people, they did lead a revolution and did lead a mark in history. And I'm just hoping that they're able to take at least, criticisms that I am, not as harsh criticism, because I'm not someone who's going to be harsh on someone unless it's the person being a piece of shit. I don't think this is a situation where Patrick or Pete are being assholes. I think it's just the fame got over their head and they're just reflecting on that. Or at least I hope that's what's going on right now. Because I like Fall Out Boy. I love Fall Out Boy. They were the band that got me into music. And I just wanted to end the stream on this. Is that, I do hope for the best. I mean, if I personally think that the newest Panic at the Disco album is way better than what they've made, the past 3 albums, then I have high hopes for Fall Out Boy to be able to do the same thing. Maybe not necessarily just go back to the roots of, their punk or even post-hardcore days, but just be able to trust making rock music again. And that's all that I hope for. Because once you follow the trends, you become the villain that you fought against. And that's all I've got to say. So, especially as someone who, like I said, known them for 17, 18 years, got into music thanks to them, seen them in concert, and considers them to be one of their favorite bands of all time. And that's all I've got to really say. But regardless, though, I hope you guys at least enjoyed this. If you disagree with me, that is completely fine. At least with the tiering itself. And I hope to see you guys actually, post your own tier lists, because this tier list is going to be on my Discord. So if you guys are interested, you can check that out. And also, while you're at it, if you want to, you can hit that follow button and turn on the bell icon so that you'll be notified exactly when I'll be streaming. Granted, like I said earlier, Twitch is kind of a bit of a thing right now, so I may just go back to YouTube. But regardless, it just kind of, whatever. But if you do want to, you can also either hit that subscribe button on Twitch or go to the donation box on YouTube, or go to a potentially future Patreon that I'll be opening up. It can't do any of that stuff. That's completely fine. What makes me happy is that you at least saw this stream, and that just makes me happy regardless, because I like doing these streams. I know this was kind of a rush sort of version of what we were going to do, but let it be known that next time it will be a bigger stream, and I'm going to have another guest on here, and I'm going to be excited about that. But either way, thank you for being here for our 2nd anniversary for this series, and I hope to see you guys on the next one, and even just the next stream I do. Until then, I'll see you guys later. Good night, everybody.